19th Conference of American Armies. Over 3 decades ago, the armies of the Western Hemisphere saw the need for collective cooperation to ensure the security and stability of the region. Among the common interests of the armies was the deterrence and containment of the communist movement in the hemisphere. To provide a platform upon which the region's army leaders could meet on a multilateral level and deliberate issues of mutual interest, the Conference of American Armies was created. Over the years, the conference has developed into a multinational group of 25 member and observer armies and international organizations. Today, the Conference of American Armies is an example of a productive international cooperative effort in the Western Hemisphere. The objective of the Conference of American Armies, or CAA, is to achieve a close integration and cooperation among the armies for the joint study of problems of mutual interest. This objective takes into consideration that security and defense contribute to the social, economic, cultural, scientific, and technical progress of all countries in the American continent. In the CAA's present form, the hosting of the conference rotates every 2 years among member nations. The 19th Conference of American Armies was inaugurated at the Pentagon on February 16, 1990, when the new conference chairman, United States Army Chief of Staff General Carl E. Vuono, accepted the hosting responsibilities from the Army of Guatemala, the host of the 18th CAA. One of General Vuono's first actions as conference chairman was to establish an organization to plan, coordinate, and conduct 9 conferences with CAA member armies. This organization included a general secretariat to direct the CAA and to task elements of the U.S. Army staff, agencies, and installations to support the conferences. The concept also called for a permanent executive secretariat of the Conference of American Armies, which serves as the day-to-day executive, coordinating, and administrative body for the CAA. Established in Crystal City, Virginia, the Permanent Executive Secretariat consisted of officers from the U.S. Army, the Army of Guatemala, and the Army of Colombia, U.S. Army non-commissioned officers, and a civilian office staff. This team planned, coordinated, and supervised 7 specialized conferences, a preparatory conference, and the Commanders' Conference over the ensuing 2 years. Just as important as conducting the conferences, the PES also performed the vital mission of conducting liaison and facilitating communication with the member and observer countries throughout the 2-year period. The theme of the 19th CAA calls for the investigation of the role of the American armies in the preservation of democracy in the continent, in the presence of the new ideological views of the communist world and the political, social, and economic situation of the American countries. The U.S. Army, as host for the 19th Conference of American Armies, was responsible for consolidating member Army views on the mandatory theme. This consensus report will be presented during the course of the Commanders' Conference. During the 19th Conference of American Armies, many informative and substantive topics were discussed throughout the 7 specialized conferences and the preparatory conference. These gatherings covered issues in military law, logistics, training and military education, science, technology and medicine, communications, civil affairs, and intelligence. A preparatory conference was held during July 1991 in Washington, D.C. to review draft agreements from the specialized conferences and to prepare the agenda for the Commanders' Conference in November 1991. The first specialized meeting of the 19th Conference of American Armies was the Military Law Symposium, an idea born from the 18th CAA in Guatemala. 28 member and observer delegates, representing 16 armies, came together from May 28th to June 2nd, 1990, at the U.S. Army's Judge Advocate General School in historic Charlottesville, Virginia. Throughout the symposium, the delegates explored such subjects as the methods of combating subversion and terrorism within their respective legal systems, the need to create a course on comparative law concerning military legislation, and the need for a working committee to study existing laws on terrorism, subversion, and illegal drug trafficking. After 3 days in Charlottesville, the delegates traveled to Washington, D.C. to visit the Judge Advocate General of the Army, the U.S. Army Court of Military Review, and other points of interest. The Military Law Symposium produced one draft agreement to be carried forward for consideration at the Commanders' Conference. In September 1990, the Logistics Seminar brought together 23 delegates representing 15 armies to the U.S. Army's logistics facility at New Cumberland Army Depot, Pennsylvania. The objective of the conference was to consider establishing a permanent biennial logistics conference within the CAA. Presentations during the seminar focused on the theme of sustainability and maintainability, logistics for the future. In addition to dialogue on selected topics, the delegates discussed the United States Army's logistical operations in Operation Desert Shield. The seminar was a success, resulting in a 4-part draft agreement recommending the establishment of a permanent biennial specialized conference on logistics. From 22 to 25 October 1990, the 3rd Training and Military Education Conference took place at Fort Benning, Georgia. Hosted by the United States Army Infantry Center with the assistance of the School of the Americas, the conference was attended by 29 member and observer Army delegates from 16 armies. The U.S. Army is the permanent host of this conference, with the understanding that any Army desiring to host it may do so. The delegates focused on such subjects as NCO development, computerized wargame simulation, and training methods for psychological warfare. The results of the conference were 7 draft agreements, which were carried forward to the Commanders' Conference. 34 delegates from 15 armies met at Fort Sam Houston in San Antonio, Texas for the Science, Technology, and Medical Conference from 28 to 31 January 1991. The conference was actually 2 conferences in one: the Science and Technology Conference and the Medical Conference. The presentations at the Science and Technology Conference investigated many interesting topics, including science and technology in the Brazilian Army, logistics over the shore, and hydrology. The Medical Conference attendees heard presentations on numerous subjects such as burn injuries, hearing loss due to battlefield explosions, infrared telethermography in the control of trench foot, and the Argentine military pharmaceutical industry. There were 5 draft agreements developed by the delegates during the course of the conference in San Antonio to be provided to the Commanders' Conference for approval. The Second Communications Conference of the 19th CAA was hosted by the United States Army Signal Center at Fort Gordon, Georgia, from 24 to 28 March 1991. 29 representatives from 17 armies and 1 inter-American agency met to foster improved means of communication among the member armies. The discussion at the conference investigated satellite systems, high-frequency networks, and the management of Army communications and computer fieldings. Of particular note was a proposal to study the feasibility of integrating the existing inter-American Army, Navy, and Air Force communications systems. Also proposed was the establishment of a communications school courses registry and the conducting of a joint communications exercise with the Inter-American Air Forces. While at Fort Gordon, the delegates toured the computer and automated communications facilities at the United States Army Signal School as part of the week-long conference. 5 draft agreements resulted from the discussions at Fort Gordon to be presented to the Commanders' Conference. The second Civil Affairs Conference was hosted by the Army of Guatemala in Guatemala City from 10 to 14 May 1991. Guatemala is the permanent host of this conference, with the understanding that any army desiring to host it may do so. In addition to the many informative meetings and presentations, the 20 conference delegates representing 10 armies visited a civil affairs company and received a hands-on demonstration on its mission and capabilities. The member delegations created 3 draft agreements before they concluded the conference in the beautiful city of Antigua. To prepare for the Commanders' Conference to take place in November 1991, 28 delegates from the member armies gathered in Washington, D.C. from 14 to 17 July 1991 for the preparatory conference. At the time, the 19th CAA was receiving new leadership. General Gordon R. Sullivan became the new Chief of Staff of the United States Army and Chairman of the 19th CAA. Brigadier General David C. Meade assumed the duties of the General Secretary of the CAA and presided over the preparatory conference. Soon after the delegates arrived in Washington, D.C., they began the challenging task of reviewing and finalizing the draft agreements that had been recommended at the various specialized conferences up to that date. After 3 days of diligent efforts, the preparatory conference delegates consolidated the proposed agreements for final review by the respective member Army General Staffs and presentation for approval at the Commanders' Conference. 27 delegates from 15 armies met from 25 to 29 August 1991 at Fort Huachuca, Arizona for the Intelligence Conference, the last of the specialized conferences. The conference was hosted by the United States Army Intelligence Center and provided a forum for the delegates to update the combined intelligence assessment and investigate other military intelligence issues. The results of the conference were 2 draft agreements to be discussed at the Commanders' Conference in Washington, D.C. Prior to departing, the delegates were treated to a taste of the Old West when they visited historic Tombstone, Arizona. Fulfilling a requirement of the 18th CAA, the 19th CAA incorporated the functions of the Permanent Commission of Inter-American Military Communication, COPACOMI, as a subordinate office under the PES. This organization, to be named DICOMI, took steps to improve the high-frequency net which supports the CAA. The net control station is permanently located at Fort Detrick, Maryland. Because of the terrain features of the Andes Mountains, 2 relay stations operate in Brazil and Colombia. Traffic on the net has increased dramatically and now provides reliable, unclassified official service between the PES and the member armies. The 19th Conference of American Armies culminated with the Commanders' Conference, taking place from 3 to 8 November 1991 in Washington, D.C. This auspicious event was attended by delegates and leaders of the Western Hemisphere armies and international organizations, displaying the spirit of cooperation that is the trademark of the organization. The Commanders' Conference began with an impressive opening ceremony at Fort Myer, Virginia, with an address by the United States Secretary of the Army. The dignitaries proceeded to the Ritz-Carlton Hotel in Pentagon City, Virginia, to conduct 4 days of plenary sessions, committee meetings, presentations, and social events. A highlight of the first day was the keynote address by the Secretary of Defense of the United States. Secretary Cheney noted the importance of the Conference of the American Armies in today's world. The welcome dinner on the evening of the conference's first day provided a relaxed atmosphere for the delegates to renew old friendships and form new ones. Throughout the week, the many draft agreements formed over the course of the previous 2 years were all considered for approval by the Army commanders. The conference also took time to enjoy a particularly relevant exhibit at the Smithsonian Institution, which commemorated the 500th anniversary of the 1492 discovery voyage of Christopher Columbus. As the 19th CAA drew to a close, the host of the 20th Conference of American Armies, Brazil, was officially announced and approved. The agreements reached during the 19th CAA Commanders Conference display the results of tireless effort. This success is due to the participation, cooperation, and contributions of all of the member armies. The Conference of American Armies continues to evolve to become an important part of the strength of the Western Hemisphere. This progress and tradition will continue in Brazil, where member armies will again have the opportunity to discuss problems of mutual interest, and just as important, establish and strengthen friendships among professional soldiers.